Welcome back. You're watching World Talks, where every word matters. I'm Anna Galczyńska. And welcome to multipolar world. As U.S. hegemony declines, new emerging powers are growing more influential on key global issues, according to a new report by the Munich Security Conference. Does it mean the world's entering an era of heightened tensions and uncertainty? On the diplomacy on the eve of the Munich conference and on its more direct potential effects with regard to peace talks on the war in Ukraine, I have a pleasure to discuss with Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, University College Dublin. Good morning.
Very good morning to you.
Thank you for joining us. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance may meet during the conference later this week, as we learned from the presidential office, which confirmed for the Kyiv Independent on February 9th. The U.S. delegation on the top of the European Security Conference is quite strong. It will include Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's special envoy to Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg. So, is this the right time, according to you, for talking of peace? Russia doesn't seem to want it at present.
I mean, it's always the right time to try to find a way to end Russia's now almost 3-year invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And certainly, as you note, the Zelensky government has expressed the willingness to get to the negotiating table. The latest offer being, for example, that Ukraine would return part of the Kursk region, which it holds in Western Russia, in exchange for Russia ending the occupation of some Ukrainian territory. But as you also note, the Kremlin, despite always talking about peace talks, has shown no interest in real negotiations with Ukraine. They simply have continued to insist that Ukraine capitulate, accept not only the occupation, but the annexation of territory by Russia. And the question that we have, of course, is where will others position themselves? We pretty much know where the European Union, including Poland, will be. They'll continue to support negotiations where Ukraine maintains its sovereignty, territorial integrity. Although in the short term, Russian occupation may have to be accepted, we don't know exactly where the U.S. government will lie under the new Trump administration, which is what makes this U.S. presence not only at the Munich Security Conference, but what appears to be a meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, why that will be, I think, significant on the weekend.
Mm-hmm. Well, negotiations start amid reports by Ukrainian intelligence warning that Russia is building up its military capacities up by another 100,000. Now, the Danish intelligence agency says that if Moscow perceives NATO as weak, Russia could be ready to wage a large-scale war in Europe within 5 years. So, isn't it a moment to brace up and to change the perspective instead of arranging a peace deal?
Well, Russia's already waging hybrid warfare across Europe. And by hybrid warfare, I don't mean direct military invasion, but I mean, for example, cyber warfare. Sabotage operations, for example, the series of packages which have contained explosive, some of which have been intercepted before they possibly could be put into airports or on airliners, the cutting of undersea cables, and of course, propaganda warfare, if you want to put it that way, the flooding of the zone with disinformation. So, you have to prepare for that anyway. And I think that's simply what certain countries are highlighting. But you can do both. You can pursue negotiations to end that Russian invasion of Ukraine while preparing yourself for the fact that Vladimir Putin may try to undermine your country or indeed the European Union elsewhere. And that's just a sensible way of moving forward.
All right. Now, let's talk about reality in details. We hear that the security guarantees must be solely on Europe's shoulder, and Europe alone cannot offer security guarantees for Ukraine. This is the Volodymyr Zelensky's stance. So I suggest we hear from Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, on this matter.
The European continent deserves to be free from any aggression, but it ought be those in the neighborhood investing the most in that collective, individual and collective defense. That's common sense, as the president talks a lot about. Common sense is you defend your neighborhood, and the Americans will come alongside you in helping in that defense. If and when that happens, and I believe it will, because of President Trump, most NATO countries are already close to 2%. We believe that needs to be higher. We are not sending U.S. troops to Ukraine.
This was stated quite bluntly. And does that mean that the Europeans are ready, and can they secure any peace deal for Ukraine?
Well, let's talk first of all about the American or the Trump administration position. Pete Hegseth isn't really a military specialist. He's not as much a defense secretary as much as a spokesperson for the Trump administration. And that line is, look, Trump really does not want to be invested in Ukraine unless he can get something in return. In other words, he doesn't see it as supporting Ukraine, but trying to get some type of advantage out of it. And so his latest line, for example, is, look, if we give you military aid, we expect rare earth minerals, something that Ukraine may negotiate. The fundamental here, of course, is that you can't just simply treat Ukraine as a business deal. You have to treat it as a security interest, given the Russian invasion. And that really requires, as Vladimir Zelensky has mentioned, not only the Europeans, it does require the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is the largest individual provider of military aid. It is a significant provider of economic aid. It has a very strong diplomatic presence. If the Trump administration was simply to withdraw entirely from Ukraine, then I think it would be very difficult to get any type of significant negotiation, because the Kremlin would manipulate that situation. And indeed, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the Trump administration to back away. So what does the European Union do? First of all, it has to stand committed to a meaningful negotiation which maintains Ukraine as a sovereign country, which maintains most of Ukrainian territory, which continues to provide military and economic security for Ukraine. And you have to try to persuade U.S. officials to be part of that. That's a difficult ask, given how unpredictable Donald Trump is and given how weak someone like Pete Hegseth is. But you do have officials like the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, like the Special Envoy, Keith Kellogg, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Those are the people you really have to work with, starting with the Munich Security Conference this weekend.
Exactly. At the same time, there is a meeting in Ramstein format, and here the American presence is weakened, and they're not attending in full format as they previously did. So we have those signals coming that the U.S. is really backing from the whole process. So what is that you expect from Munich Security Conference? What could be the takeaway?
First of all, there's a complicating factor here in that the Trump administration is attacking the U.S. military. Now, I know that sounds strange, but as part of its attempt to, break or at least bend U.S. agencies to Trump's will, it's actually threatening to purge military commanders, even as we speak. So that's part of the reason why they're weakened at Ramstein. What do I expect from Ramstein and from the Munich Security Conference? I expect a very strong European commitment that we do not back away from Ukraine, that we work with other international partners. And remember, there are partners beyond Europe and beyond the United States. For example, Asian partners who are significant here. I expect them to continue to provide a commitment to non-military assistance, to economic assistance. Whether the Americans will be part of that, whether they will be supportive at the Munich Security Conference, I think they'll give a very cautious statement. I think J.D. Vance is not a supporter of helping Ukraine. He's not a supporter of working with Europe, as we saw at the AI conference yesterday, where the U.S. made that disgraceful statement, working against any type of coordinated effort. I think you have to look at individual U.S. officials as to whether they continue to maintain influence. And I repeat, the two officials I'm watching are Keith Kellogg, the U.S. envoy, and the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. If they can continue to maintain influence, since they support military aid to Ukraine as part of the negotiations with the Russians, there is hope that the Americans will be constructive. If Waltz and Kellogg are pushed to the side, and we have to listen to Pete Hegseth or J.D. Vance, as well as Donald Trump, we better get ready to be tough. And we will need to be tough, because if Europe does not stand with Ukraine, whatever the U.S. does, then Russia will prevail.
Scott Lucas, thank you so much for these insights. We are looking forward to the takeaways and results of the Munich Security Conference. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Stay tuned to TVP World for more commentaries.